elects half the Senate. How should I put this? The 18% of the population that elects half the Senate lives predominantly in the red states. The red states elect a much larger proportion of the Senate than you would expect from a population, let's put it that way. So it's going to be very hard for the Democrats to make inroads there. And in the House, it's now gerrymandered and locked in that way. So a lot has been allowed, and next comes the gerrymandering of the presidency by ALEC in these swing states, where it's now going to be, if they get their way, and there's nothing really to stop them from getting their way, legislatively, because they have control of those states, it's going to be electoral votes would be apportioned by congressional district which they've already gerrymandered. So gerrymandered to favor the Republican side. So states that were presidential blue states that put it winner-take-all system, you can argue with the winner-take-all system, there's a lot wrong with it, but basically it put a full slate of, let's say, Wisconsin Democratic electors into the Electoral College is now going to be more Republican electors than Democratic electors. It's basically, if they get their way with this, going to be virtually impossible to elect a Democratic president in this country. The Senate's already over, the House is over. They hold 68 out of the 98 state legislatures. It's later than most people in this country would ever think, because we're told that everything is a political sports event, and the horse race, and the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's like a football game, and they're all in it. But if you look at the structure and you look at what Karl Rove has achieved, either by means that are foul, but the question is how foul. If the means include, dirty politics is one thing, rigging the vote is another. And it looks like it includes that as well. A great deal has been achieved. So it is time, it's well past time, to become active and insistent and connected and really tenacious about this. And again, it has to be done without a George Bush doll to throw darts at. George Bush was a very motivating force in the area of election integrity after 2 stolen elections. We don't have that right now. It's more subtle, it's down ballot. Who gets excited about state legislatures in most of this country? But that's exactly the task. It's to get people to recognize that this vote counting system is on its face. Unobservable vote counting is unacceptable. And there's a lot of evidence that it has allowed what amounts to a rolling coup to occur in this country, a coup that is much less likely to provoke resistance. I always say, if they rolled tanks down Pennsylvania Avenue, we'd be marching in the streets. I mean, there'd be a resistance movement. But when it's done in this kind of infrastructural, subtle way, people are just, especially in this country where, the distractions are so great. So the question is, how do you get it out there and to our leadership and to the public to the point where you build a foundation of pressure that is really, really going to have an impact. And I do think it has to come. There has to be public pressure and public organization, and it has to be something that we really care about the way the revolutionaries cared about democracy, 200 plus years ago. There really has to be, more action than we've had, and that means going to friends, going to family, going to your kids, going to your grandkids, going to their friends. I mean, spreading the word among people who probably are not as motivated as we all are here, and certainly not as informed. I'm hoping that Code Red can be a big part of that, can be a vehicle, because it does tell a story in a way that a lot of people, I think, will get. It's not narrow band. It probably would sink in with a pretty big audience. So that's one reason why I'm, doing something which is generally uncomfortable for me, which is actually taking it and going on the road and promoting it, and I hope that that we continue with that. Yeah.
Do you see any problem with how we're messaging what we're doing? We call it election integrity movement, and I think that came in California about 2006 or something, 2007. Sort of an answer, what do you want? We want integrity. But a lot of people say, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, the title and other things, how can we change the message and the channels of the message that we get better heard?
Yeah, there's probably no,
There's-
yeah, go ahead.
I think, very soon, I'm just trying to think, because I'm thinking about trying to communicate, like even on Facebook or something, but just very simply, I mean, I'm kind of a curbstone, so I just, simple, but the fact that the 2014 election with all the Republicans, because people, the public are scratching their heads, and to get it out that the most likely reason that those people are in is something that's been worked on for a long time, and that's vote rigging. It's not being counted. We simply need to find a way to count it. We are going to be in serious trouble if we don't count it. And I mean, just getting that, I mean, that's such a, am I naive, or, I mean,
The
just to
question is,
get
how
it
do
to
we
people.
get people to get that? I mean, like here,
But there's a lot of people, I mean, if really people do care, I mean, people are voting and they're scratching their head, it just needs to be, I think on social media, just getting out, it hasn't really been talked about a lot on social media. A lot of other things, TPP has been a big thing that, has been around, and everybody's been signing stuff. They haven't, we really haven't talked about vote rigging. It just isn't out there so much in terms of, because it can
We have a-
accumulate it. So anyway, there you go.
comment from the back, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Janet.
Janet, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I don't understand who this group is. It sounds like it's a Democratic Party group, is that correct? Or-
Voter Rights Task Force.
Okay, so, because what I'm hearing is the Republicans are the bad guys and the Democrats are the good guys, but they are not able to get enough votes. And so, but anyway, that's what I'm hearing. I haven't heard any reference to third parties or some other change in the voting system.
Yeah, yeah, that's an important distinction because, well, all right, so that's important because I often, am confronted with this is all very partisan. And we're nonpartisan in the analysis we do. I mean, we just look at the data. And of course, there's nothing nonpartisan about the data that we keep coming up with. I mean, there's the data and it's very partisan. There are many things you could do to improve an electoral system. I mean, and clearly our culture, our electoral political culture is very, that's why I refer to it as sclerotic a bit. Our democracy is it's locked into some norms that you probably wouldn't choose if you were starting from scratch and trying to build a country today. But there's a lot of things, including this power duopoly between the Democrats and the Republicans, that we kind of work within that framework. And yes, there are people who want to get instant runoff voting. There are people who want to get rid of the electoral college, want to get national popular vote, all of which are pretty good pro-democratic, small d democratic initiatives. And yet, there's something, when I encounter that group, and I have down at various workshops and summits and whatnot, I guess the reaction I generally have is, okay, all that's really, really good, and it's a great ideal to work towards, and maybe even one day you'll get it, but the political reality right now is we're being taken over by a minority, by a small corporatist minority that has a plan to make sure that they encounter no significant political opposition from the representatives of the public. And so there are two kind of different things going on that are related. One of them is that there is a very real political shift of balance of power and of center of power, which has happened over the past 10 years or so, obscured a little bit by the Democratic victories in 2008 and 2012. But again, the idea behind election rigging is to not win every election, it's to minimize your losses, maximize your victories. And that's the pattern that we've seen. And right now, it's way down that road. It's probably going to go further down that road. And so we're faced with a very practical, confronted with the practical reality that the country has effectively been politically taken over. And so all those things are part of the pot. But if you're going to go public with something like, election integrity, and I agree that election integrity, there's probably very few issues out there that are less sexy than the vote counting process. In terms of, I mean, come on, Caitlyn Jenner got to 1 million tweets and Twitter followers in 4 hours. I got to 100 Twitter followers in 8 months or so. I mean, and I tried. It wasn't like I didn't put out tweets. I put out tweets. It's not a sexy issue. So, and if you went public with this and you said, it's all about the Democrats, getting beaten by Republicans and stuff, you've already lost a good part of your audience, including a lot of people who are libertarians and have a distrust of the government and the corporate structure, and you've lost them. So that's one reason why this veers towards, it does present the forensics, because I think it's important to be somewhat reality-based. This is our evidence. But its main idea is a vote counting at the very core bedrock protocol of electoral politics, of a democracy, is the vote counting process. And it must be observable. And I will, just state, and I bring this out very often, the man behind the curtain. Who is familiar with the man behind the curtain? Okay, so the man behind the curtain, some may not. If we were having an election in this room and, the mode of the election between Jim and Richard was to, they're standing for office once again. They're exhausted from their campaign this afternoon, but was to hand me the ballots. Everybody fills out their ballots, and they handed to me, and I went into the kitchen, and I rustled around in there and came out 10 minutes later and said, I've counted the ballots, Jim has won, and by the way, I put the ballots down the garbage disposal. Who would accept the results of that election? And all the more so if I had, a Jim for President button on, or I had just come from lunch with Jim or whatever, which is what these companies are. They're basically radical Republican affiliates are these companies, Dominion and ES&S and Diebold when it was around, and Premier and Sequoia and Hart Intercivic. I mean, Romney had shares of Hart Intercivic through his family. So, can we allow, independent of any of the forensic evidence, if you took all the forensic evidence and all the Democratic, Republican stuff, and you basically just threw it away, we'd still be left with this unobservable vote counting system. And I believe it's on that basis that you have to go out and say, at the very minimum, we got to recognize that this is not an acceptable system, because we would never trust it for any election that we were holding ourselves. Why then do we trust it to determine the direction of states and the entire country and a good deal of the world? And so I think that's the argument that has to be made. How to turn it into something, that is just gripping and grabbing, that we put a lot of thought into that, and I would say that we haven't succeeded, brilliantly thus far, obviously, in capturing the public imagination, so that remains to be done.
Jen?
Sorry, excuse me, just a second.
Yeah, so, first of all, you need somebody to help you with your Twitter, because I think there are ways to make them sexy, even about vote counting. But in any case, so.
Well, you should read some of my tweets. They were pretty,
or at least
pretty gripping, but
get them to be trending. But
yeah, that I don't know. Yeah, that I need help.
But I mean, from the Democratic Party has been veering to the right for forever, and and some people think that the Democrats don't even want to win, or at least certain. Like in 2000, Al Gore didn't really fight to have the whole state of Florida recounted, and in 2004, Kerry basically rolled over the next night or something. This way,
Next morning.
Right, but still, anyway.
He could have stuck out to the next night at least.
What's really the difference? And these machines, are the companies, it's private, it's privatized voting.
And
That's
can
the
I
problem.
piggyback on that, the Democratic Party has not been there on this issue, and that is purposeful. I believe. I mean, all of a sudden Hillary got separate, got some money to have a lawyer challenge the voting in various states, but the voting systems, but so the Democratic Party, we all wanted them to be doing that 12 years ago. And if the Democratic Party were really opposing the Republican Party, they would have been doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, they were complicit in standing down and not raising these questions. They were complicit, and they are
Absolutely.
now complicit. We are fighting the Democratic representatives. We are fighting Nancy Pelosi not to sign this fast track.
Right.
We're fighting the Democratic Party.
One of the things I point out in Code Red is that it's not the Democrats who have been the victims of this, takeover of the electoral process. It's the people of this country. And the unrepresented and disenfranchised people of this country. It's not the Democrats. They're sitting fairly pretty, whether they're majority or minority. They're in office. They got their perks. They got their speaking engagements, blah, blah, blah. I give many reasons for why they have never gone to bat, really, for this. And why they've not only never gone to bat for this, they've actively been hostile, and they've
Yes.
drummed out of the core
Yes.
Cynthia McKinney and anybody else, Dennis Kucinich, were completely, ostracized, who went in any way or shape or form to bat for this. It's a mystical thing. I mean, I think the way I put it is, if you ever want to enliven an understandably morose gathering of election integrity activists, just ask why the Democrats have been so complicit. And you'll get 5 different, answers in 4-part harmony, ranging from everything from naivety to stupidity to actual money, complicitness, etc. It's been very hard to work with them. Again, all the more reason why this has to be a people's movement, why this has to get out there among the people without their,
I
mediation.
think Ann was next and Donna Richard here. Ann?
Well, I felt like I got cut off before. I mean, I was talking about something about, getting out to people, that we need to communicate with people.
Yeah.
You'd asked about that, and I think that is the key issue. I mean, that's the key thing, and I wish we'd talked more about that, so, to get some serious, cool ideas, because I think that's our only hope, is to get the people, since we've been screwed, to understand it, to get it on a pretty wide, basis. And maybe it's getting a couple of fancy players, actors or whatever, to understand, or figuring out some really kind of imaginative ways to get people to realize that this is, our last hope. Maybe Bernie, does Bernie know about it?
Dawn?
I want to thank you so much for your work.
Yeah,
I mean,
me
you've
too.
been doing this for a long time, and I'm sure it's helpful. Thank
I'm
you.
not the only one who's been doing this for a long time. I mean, many of us have,
Yes,
but,
Yeah.
And some people have been doing stuff that's harder. I mean, writing a book is easy, in my view anyway. This is easy stuff compared to actually going in and trying to influence the frickin' state government of any state, or let alone the national government. I mean, people in a lot of places have been working very hard, and unfortunately, a lot of election integrity activists have kind of laid it down and given up because of the frustration levels, but that leaves, we've got to recruit some more
Well,
at
and
this
what,
point.
and I think it really is the center of our democracy, is being able to have fair elections. I mean, it's so central. And I also agree with you about the need to maybe say it differently, and what's going through my mind is, my uncle is a social psychologist, and he did his work starting in the 1960s, and his main body of work is called The Belief in a Just World. And his conclusions are basically that if people don't feel like they can have an effect on changing things, or such as getting others to stop being shocked, if they feel impotent, if they feel, they will start believing that what the situation is morally just how it's supposed to be. And so if there's some way to link this up with movements and ideas that are pro-democratic, but also have the energy of the young people, because the young people are not going to vote Democrat or Republican. There are a lot of really disengaged young people, but they have a lot of energy, and they're smart and they're progressive. So anyway, those are just some thoughts. If we could find a way to message this to people that includes the important body work. And the other thought I had is that I believe that vote rigging is a big part of what's going on, of how we're getting the governments that we have. But I wonder also if some of the belief in a just world phenomena is going on in voters who don't believe that they can affect change, and they end up believing that what we have is what we're supposed to have.
Yeah, there are two things that are related to that. I mean, one is obviously Stockholm Syndrome, because
Yeah,
there's
it's
an
very
element
similar.
of Stockholm Syndrome.
Very similar.
And the other is, I think, what's referred to as the spiral of silence. And that is when a lot of individuals all hold a certain belief that is not, a mainstream belief, that might be considered subversive or somehow out of tune, out of key. And each individual, believes they're alone, believes he or she is alone in that belief, and does not communicate it. And the less it's communicated, the more the other person feels isolated, and therefore they withdraw into themselves, and you get this spiral of silence where nobody's willing to talk about it. I believe that when we did some research, we commissioned Zogby, who at one point was pretty cooperative and then became much less so. We found out with a lot of people that have seats at the table. But at that point, he was fairly cooperative, and he did it for free for us to ask, and this was after the 2000, I think it was after 2006 or 2004, but it was in the wake of no. It was going into 2008. We wanted to do it before the election because we didn't want the results of the election to impact this poll. And it was basically asking a few questions, but the two prominent ones were whether they had full, some, very little, or no confidence in the vote counting process and in the accuracy and honesty of the vote counting process in this country. And I think 45% said they had little or no confidence in the vote counting. So this was a national sample. That was a pretty big answer. We also asked, would you be willing to spend 4 hours at some point during your lifetime as a volunteer counter of votes? We got 57% yes, 23% no. So a big majority of people came out and said, yeah, well, hell yes, we'll work for this democracy. But again, that is where the connection is missing, because people don't know, I don't know that you would, you don't know that I would, and we're not all getting together and connecting around this, and that's what has to happen. And I have to say, I'm a Luddite, I hate social media, I cannot tolerate Facebook. I think it is incredibly damaging. But that having been said, you gotta bite it, and I gotta get on Facebook, and I'm already on Twitter. I hate Twitter too. I mean, I'm a literary person. The idea of putting everything in, in haiku and 140 characters is appalling. I talk in 10-minute sentences, and this was very, very uncomfortable for me initially. And I do hate it, and I do think that the overall impact is terribly atomizing, and it feeds perfectly into the corporate plan to turn us all into zombies. Granted, nonetheless, at this point, if it's not social media, I don't know what it's going to be. Because people are isolated.
I would just really quickly just add that when you get to social media, and whatever form we use to communicate, it needs to have the message needs to include, like you were saying, vote counting, people volunteering for vote counting, but it needs to include positive actions that people can take to change the system, vote counting and other aspects of the system, but positive and examples and things like that about how things have worked. Because if without that positive, without that hope that we can affect change, we'll stay in that isolated.
Yeah, and I'm often called on the carpet for not exactly being a purveyor of, hope.
Oh,
I
but you
think
did a wonderful job of investigating what's wrong.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm very reluctant to drift away from certain realities, even if they're hard realities. And the fact is, at this point, they are hard realities because you can achieve certain things in California by virtue of the fact that California is the kind of state it is, and has, and it still takes a tremendous amount of effort. But when you look at the national direction and getting this across the country in places where it's key to national direction and national politics, there's in the political circles and in the journalistic circles, the receptivity, it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to go out there, into those halls of power with what we have to say and get heard. So that's why I really think that a lot of it is going to, I'm sorry to say this, but at some point they're going to push everybody too far. And one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to be revolutionaries, there is going to be an uprising, or we will be Prozac into acquiescence. It's one or the, it's basically one or the other. I don't think at this point, and I just have to be honest about this, I don't think the political system is likely, I wouldn't say never, it wouldn't be never, but is likely to be responsive until we show some courage, real courage. And that means, it doesn't have to mean shooting, anybody. It could mean standing around an OpScan, forming a ring around it, whatever it is, the Berkeley Tea Party, the Berkeley OpScan Party, forming that ring around the OpScan, saying, those are our ballots, we demand that they be taken out of that OpScan so that we can count them in public, arrest us, go ahead. And you get that in enough places, and eventually the New York Times has to say, this is news.
And combine that with documentaries about
That's
these
enough.
guys who've been lobbying and making headway.
Okay, so next time Sharon and then Janet,
Richard?
I
and then Katie.
I forgot one thing already because so much time has gone by. I did notice with some of the shifting of votes that it not only shifted from the left to the right, but it shifted from the very, very far right to the right. Because weren't people like Ron Paul, wasn't he shorted on votes? And some of the other, libertarian Republicans, wasn't the vote shifted to Romney from him, I think?
Yes, and that's a really interesting point. We're doing a thing called, and this might be eye-glazing territory, but we're doing a thing called cumulative vote share analysis. And it's too early in what we're doing. There are those who have already decided that it proves fraud, and they're screaming it from the rooftops. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's more that has to be done. But what we were seeing was that as you go, if you rank precincts, let's say within a state, in size order, when you get up to a certain size, about 500 to 600 voters in that precinct, and you're looking, as you go down this ranked list, so let's say in Wisconsin, where we're doing some of this, we've got about 3,500 precincts, and as you go down the ranked list and you accumulate the vote, the Republicans' vote share starts going up at about 500 to 600, and of course we jumped on that, as the explanation being, well, if you're going to rig votes, if you're going to take 100 votes per precinct, let's say, you're going to take them from the larger precincts, because if you take them from the smaller precincts, you fail the smell test, because you've stolen
Right.